Okay. We are
And
live.
we're live.
We did it. Take it away, Lewis.
Well, let's wait for a little bit. We wait till some people get in. I think it's just you and me at the moment, so we'll just chill for a little bit while.
Yeah, let me post this to Dapit right now.
Yeah, and I posted it to my Twitter account and my LinkedIn account too.
Excellent. Okay.
In the future, what we can probably do is make it go live 5 minutes before and then put ourselves up on the screen.
That's not a bad idea. We should do an opening and closing video too.
Yeah.
This is what I love. My man Noah does it. What's your? Oh, we're doing it at Moby Media. Ooh. Okay. Post it.
So we'll give people 5 minutes and then we'll kick it off. I think we already have someone. Wild Coin Talk. Good to see you, Wild Coin Talk. Maybe even our previous when we did the audio. Who was it who kept joining with us? I forget his name. Sorry?
Pardon?
We had someone else who became we had a couple of speakers besides Ryan and David.
I don't know. I love having Ryan on though.
Yeah.
Ryan's a great guy to.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Very
really.
nice. Okay, we'll just give everyone a couple of minutes.
Okay, is it posted on Moby Media is the question. Yes, it is. Okay, we're good. So I've been having a lot of fun this week messing around with some new AI tools we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I won't preempt the podcast, but it's been a very interesting week. I think a lot of shifts, people's saying, one thing I saw on Reddit was the statement of, well, with vibe coding, we can code any apps. And that's like, someone said that's really similar to, well, I have a 3D printer. I can print anything,
I think so as well.
I think it's a good analogy.
You can print anything. It's just most of us don't care to, right?
Right.
And that's, okay.
Leave it up to people who have a passion to do it. I think that's great.
Yeah. My friend has a 3D printer. He comes up with the coolest little trinkets and things for his daughter. Yeah. That's awesome. I do not. It's not my thing. But I vibe code a lot.
I think the biggest leap in 3D for me, because before it just seemed like computer sculpture. But when you can do heterogeneous materials, different colors, different types, then it starts to get really interesting because then you can embed the electronics in it and you can do different stuff with it. And I think it becomes really super interesting then. There's a really good Reddit channel called, I think it's like Practical Printing or something like that. And where people are like, I had this problem, I solved it, here's what it looks like. And really smart people, really great stuff.
Really cool. I've seen them 3D print toilet parts that broke, like just little things. I've seen them 3D print like gap fillers for doors. I've seen them 3D print really practical things that you could, but you have to be, very into that world in order for that to be like a no big deal thing to kind of take care of.
I think there's a story, Jay Leno uses it because he has vintage cars that no one builds anymore and they have no parts to, and he uses it for replacement parts. I think that's a great application.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go in about 30 seconds. How about that? We'll go at 5:30.
Ready when you are, yeah. They have full metal 3D printing now too. They have full high grade aircraft aluminum type things that they can do for, they're very expensive machines, but you can contract out to them if you need a part made. And that's pretty revolutionary.
Okay, 3 seconds, 2. Let's kick it off. Welcome everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I wore my Groot shirt. It's the only thing I have that's green. Anyway, today's topic is Capitalism, compute, and the new geography of AI. The last 7 days of headlines have been super interesting. I know, but I think there's something deeply human underneath this week's AI headlines. It's really clear that people are starting to feel that power is really shifting, even if they can't really fully name where it's going. My read is that this last week's full of AI headlines was not really about smarter tools. It was about who gets control of the systems, the costs, and the consequences as AI moves from convenience to infrastructure. I mean, what happens when AI stops being a software story and starts becoming a fight over who controls the economy, the infrastructure, the map, and the rules? This week, the deeper pattern is really uncomfortable in some ways, but it's super hard to ignore. AI is moving from a helpful tool to a structural power. The capitalism story is no longer theoretical when it's reported that tech companies are blaming massive layoffs on AI. What's really going on? Question mark. That forces the question of whether AI is really creating value or simply giving leadership a cleaner excuse to reorganize labor around fewer people and more automation. Then there's the compute story. That really gets sharp with the Nvidia CEO announcing inference inflection as the next phase of the AI boom, backed by 1 trillion, that's 1T, in orders, which is just crazy. I mean, this certainly makes it clear that the next winners may not be the smartest model makers, but the firms that control the chips, the inference, industrial scale capacity to run our civilization's AI intelligence nonstop 24/7. The geography story is also becoming real when it's reported that Elon Musk's data centers keep getting louder and residents are fed up, showing AI is no longer floating in the cloud. It's landing in actual communities where power, water, land use, and public tolerance now shape who gets to build the future. And finally, the governance story is turning political when the US administration announces an AI chatbot ban while Pentagon uses it to prepare Iran attacks. I think this certainly exposes the contradiction at the heart of this moment. Institutions are warning the public about AI risk while at the same time pulling it deeper into the machinery of state power. That's why these stories, I think, belong together. This episode we're going to talk about today is really about who benefits, who absorbs the costs, who gets shut out as AI moves from interface to infrastructure. And I think that's where the real debate starts, because beneath the headlines, this is no longer just about innovation. It's really about control. Thoughts, Achilles, while we kind of jump through some of the top stories on these?
I want you to jump into the chatbot ban that you were referring to. Could you elaborate?
The chatbot ban. Yeah. That's the whole administration banning Anthropic, right? Actually said that no one could use it, that it was toxic, essentially, and to take it out of anyone's usage. And the nice is at least the tech industry, said, no, this is crazy. Why are you picking on these guys? And so there's Anthropic, I think, is suing the administration, and there's what's called amicus briefs, where parties who want to support, what they're doing. And so I think OpenAI's put one in, Google's put in a couple of saying, you can't do this. This isn't fair to single one out and ban them so completely. So
and the best one as well, at least for coding.
But I think they were using the model in the military to review what they're doing in Iran as well. At the same time, they're saying you can't use it. So it's weird.
Anthropic would not allow them to conduct autonomous kills with Opus. They can still kill with Opus, right? They're allowed to. But their terms of service state that there has to be a human in the chain, and they wanted to remove that. Anthropic was like, it's not safe. You can't do that. And that's what got them, labeled the first U.S. company labeled a supply chain risk ever.
Yeah.
You could just not give them contracts, not label them a supply chain risk. That was like attempted, trying to give them some backlash. But with that being said, I don't see that lasting very long. They're very good at what they do. AI is the new thing, and Anthropic's not going to go anywhere. It's probably better for them as a company in the long run, because especially if they're consumer facing and they want the capital share in the Middle East, which was an internal memo that was leaked saying Middle East has a ton of capital right now, so China, and we don't want to lose that market by allowing ourselves to, just like ChatGPT kind of did. Yeah, you scared me for a second there, Lewis. I thought you were talking about.
So the actual story is the tech industry closes ranks around defense AI from Axios, right? And the story basically says there's a shift of how the major technology players are positioning themselves around military and national security AI. The deeper it signals not just one company working with the Pentagon, it's the parts of the industry are now actively defending those relationships as strategically necessary. So they're really trying to go in there and move the needle forward on some of this stuff. But meanwhile, there's a mass uninstalling of ChatGPT after the Pentagon deal, right? So it's interesting, on the one hand, Anthropic said, we want to restrict usage in a moral and ethical way. We didn't hear that from ChatGPT. We don't know. But I think as a consequence, socially, you've got, literally, it said it's a huge number, like 2 million people just basically going, no, we're out of here and quitting, which is pretty crazy. It's interesting that there's that powerful a reaction that consumer trust really was broken when AI crosses into defense, I guess.
So there's another fun concept in there. Software, as we've discussed a million times, and I will include LLMs as software, are ubiquitous. So GPT doesn't have such a unique product that we can't get their services from Anthropic or Grok or even a local Quen model to a huge extent, right? And yeah, if you do something that upsets us in a non-technical manner, even though they've done a lot of things that have upset people in a technical manner, like one of their most popular models was depreciated, and that raised a huge, set of issues. And the way that their models interact, I think, are very gaslighty compared to the rest of them. Like GPTs, I stopped using it for some time ago because everything I did was right to it. Be like, hey, this code, I don't know. What do you think about that? He said, you're totally correct, man. Let's mess up this code. And then just would blaze forward. It didn't ever develop its own internal guidance, which Claude very much has. Claude will be like, that's a horrible idea. We can't do that. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, that's very important. People can switch right over to Anthropic. Why not? They're not losing anything. They can move their chats over. I had my family do it some time ago, even though my wife still uses GPT-5, but that's cool. Most of us use Anthropic, or I love some of the Asian models too, for just like, if you're looking from a cost basis, right? And you want them.
Oh yeah.
Kimmy's great. You can pull it off of Morpheus API, anyone's API, and you get it for 1/50th the price. Yeah. So I think it's more about the fact that we have that choice right now, which is awesome. I hope that choice will be steady. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like for everyone watching here, post a comment on it. When AI companies become defense partners, who's really supposed to hold them accountable? I think that's an important question. The other one is, I think, would you keep using an AI product if you believe it had become part of a military system you opposed, right? And clearly a lot of people, trust is now becoming a product feature because a lot of people basically went, we're out of here. So it's interesting how AI has become so pervasive. It's become this social sort of controversial point that people are pushing on, which I think is a good thing.
I think it's a good thing too, and I think we need to talk about sovereign AI, as I do every week. This week, Microsoft launched a model called BitNet, and BitNet is it's a natively trained quantized version on 1 bit. So usually models are trained on like 16 bit. So you can run pretty smart models on like my Chromebook, my cell phone, my tiny little laptop. That's what people should be doing. Is you download whatever software, any LLM Studio, Olama, whatever software supports it, download the model and just use it on your own hardware. In time, you can give it more skills and more abilities. It can index your hard drive. It can become your little assistant. But then you don't have to worry about any subscriptions. You can do it directly through it. And like our next version on DAPIT that we're working on is the ability for you to actually do this with code off of your own computer. We really believe that sovereign is the way, because these things can change their fundamental uses. They can change things that you've relied on for a long period of time, any given moment. If it's your own model, that's not the case.
Yeah, there was an article on agentic AI and sovereign private AI that came out on Computer Weekly. It's basically, organizations worry about data exposure, compliance, strategic dependence, privacy, a whole bunch of stuff. And so there's this shift from AI as an open utility to AI as a protected national or enterprise capability, which is really interesting to see that people are starting to go, I don't want to share my data, whether I'm an enterprise or a person. Now that's becoming even more important. Certainly at the country, nation state level, it's a really important thing, and we're seeing lots of activity. The Stargate project, I think it went on hold, or there's some issues with it. It's kind of like paused, I think. But Norway, for example, is going full bore on their component of the Stargate project. So, we're seeing sovereign AI just as a way to, for national protection, for privacy, for security, is just becoming more and more important. You and I have talked about the need for individuals to, run your local AI, run your local LLMs. It's now possible. May not be very fast, but you can start to do it. There have been some hardware announcements and more coming. I think the June announcement of the Mac Pro Ultra Studio box I think is going to be really hot, right? I think that box I definitely want to invest in, because finally we'll have a consumer, in quotes, product that we can probably run something decent on. If it's limited to 128 gigabytes, I'll be very disappointed, but
256 if it's anything like the current family, and I hope they go back to 512. But it's really hard.
I mean, then you can run some decent stuff, right?
You can, and when you see speed, don't believe that. I get over 100 tokens per second on my Mac Studio. 100 tokens per second on a Qwen 3.5. I have it tuned to MLX, right? I've really dove into it. I wrote like a DGUF version of it, but it's, extremely fast. It has memory. It remembers things I tell it, weeks ago. Everything is a lot further along than people get. And the reason I think that RAM prices, not just RAM prices, compute prices, you can't get old computers right now for anything less than an arm and a leg. You can't find a 512 Studio available for any amount of money right now if you wanted to go buy it, because people are realizing this, right? And they're running their businesses, they're running their homes, I will soon replace Alexa. I will soon replace all these cloud services that I'm relying on with my one Mac Studio M1 Ultra. That'll run those for me just because I can. And why not? How cool is that, right? If I buy a few wired cameras, I can just have my AI take over them and not use everything else.
Right. Besides model, sovereignty, there's obviously chip sovereignty. And there was an article this week in the Financial Times. China's second largest chip maker has developed technology to produce AI chips. So basically, Chinese domestic chip production, not just about industrial pride, it's about reducing dependence on foreign bottlenecks and keeping national AI ambitions viable under geopolitical pressure. That matters because chip sovereignty increasingly determines whether a country can compete, scale, and defend its own technology base, which is interesting. Now, when you actually look at the article, it's like 7 nanometer, right? Which I think Intel is at 2. So it's not bleeding edge, but it's sufficient, right?
You don't need bleeding edge. And what we use is not bleeding edge, right? No one here has a Blackwell. No one's running a 9000. Like, bleeding edge is for data centers. I wish to actually have been building rigs all week for fun. But unless you have $35,000 to $60,000, you're not going to run one of these things locally. And an H100, an H200, B200, those things, would you try to run locally? You need a different power source, dedicated 20 amp. Like, that's not what's necessary. What's necessary is we have sovereignty over our chipset and the operating systems that run on top of them. And currently, Nvidia and that's that company, Palantir, they made an announcement a few days ago. They're going to start making operating systems for these. We don't want that, right? Chip manufacturers being separate from OS manufacturers. I guess Apple's a unique case, right? But like, we want to be able to make things ourselves. And the direction this is heading is, if what I want to make does not fit what the chip manufacturer wants me to make, you can't do it. I'm sure you know what a PlayStation 5 is, right? It would be the most powerful AI machine ever. But Sony's locked down hardware for 20 years, right? The last one any of us could break was a PS3, and you had to do it with liquid gas, freezing something, and restarting it at the exact moment. So that's what we're going to see with computers. And we don't really want that. I still want people to build their own computers and way to build your own. And,
I think there's enough competition that we won't see, proprietary systems take over. I think, given open source, I mean, the Chinese are very focused on open source, software.
Yeah, it was a model, but yeah, you're right.
They're developing their own chipsets. As you said, you don't need 2 nanometer. You can have much less. So that means other sovereign countries can, to do a semiconductor fab back, this is a while ago, it was like $1 billion to build one of those suckers with all the control, air control, dust control, all this other stuff. A sovereign nation can invest that and start to build their own chips if they need to. I'm sure, maybe they can repurpose what they're already doing with this in semiconductor industries already across Europe. So, I think it's interesting. Model sovereignty, software sovereignty, chip sovereignty, hardware sovereignty, and energy sovereignty. They're becoming really important in order to make sure that, you're not having dependencies. I mean, we're seeing it now in the US with the dependency on oil. And the situation that we're in here, and obviously the rest of the planet, don't want to go too far down that rat hole. But it's interesting, the fight for sovereignty and interdependence at the national level and the individual level is like an ongoing story around those sort of things.
I can't see that going anywhere but good.
Yeah,
we don't need these. We can really do this on a local level. Abu Dhabi has their own nuclear reactor. Why doesn't Texas have a nuclear reactor? Why doesn't, we will get there to where when necessity kicks in, we'll just jump to innovation. And I think that'll be a good thing for the world. Because, supply chains are at risk for sure.
Yes, there's nuclear. But, I mean, Australia's been a really leading edge on, alternative energy. The state of South Australia has achieved almost complete like wind and solar, and obviously they invested lots and lots and lots of money in batteries. They bought a whole ton of Tesla batteries, and so they're really a role model for how you can, you don't have to, but you can if you want to do nuclear. But if you don't, and you've got lots of sunshine, it's okay. So it is becoming practical at microstate levels to do this. And we're seeing it across certain parts of the US, California and the West Coast, certainly doing a lot of investment in that. One story that was interesting this week was Sam Altman admits that AI is disrupting the basic fabric of capitalism, which I thought is interesting. It's framed not as an incremental business tool, but as a force that alters the foundations of economic organization itself. And I think that's only really part of the story because, I'm also involved a lot in blockchain and crypto stuff, and we're seeing tremendous developments with intelligent instruments. I mean, a crypto token is a dumb static thing, right? Then you have smart contracts. But what we're seeing is this next evolution called intelligent instruments, which allow for AI intelligence embedded in with metadata, like the jurisdiction, the compliance, the legality, the deed of land or whatever it is this thing is, right? And that it also integrates with accounting rules and accounting, because the hardest thing at the moment, is how do you account for your crypto, right? I mean, there's ways, they're kind of kludgy, but this next generation that I'm seeing evolve, which is the combination of artificial intelligence, smart contracts, crypto tokens, blockchain. I posted an article on my LinkedIn profile, which is, I think, we have centralized exchanges for transactions of swapping assets, whatever they are, stock, pork bellies, whatever. But once you make the intelligent instrument, right, it can then trade itself no matter what. So you don't need centralized markets anymore. Centralized markets were a function of the old way of doing things, because you were at one place, I was another place. We had to meet in a market and exchange goods, right? We have the internet for that now. And if you create intelligent artificial intelligence with metadata, tokens, and a currency infrastructure, suddenly markets are everywhere. And I think that's going to be a fundamental shift. And I think that's going to disrupt the basic fabric of capitalism. So yes, AI is part of that, but there's all these other elements starting to come together that are very, very powerful. We're seeing what MasterCard is doing in that area with AI agents and Visa, obviously, and Coinbase as well, working with MasterCard. And then you've got go to see what Shopify is doing with the AI agents. It's really super interesting. And you and I have talked about AI to UI, or the artificial intelligence to dynamic user interface, where I believe that in 3 years' time, there'll be so many websites that will not have static pages. It'll be completely dynamic. You'll go to it and it'll start to customize itself around you and show you what you want. It'll have the structure you're kind of familiar with the navigation, but by and large, it's going to preempt that and start to anticipate what you want. So, yeah.
I agree. I didn't think about the market aspect. It was like, yeah, why do we? I think the toughest thing on that aspect is going to be regulation.
That's why the metadata builds in the regulation to it. See, that's the biggest problem, that I think financial people have with, crypto and some of this other stuff is regulation. It needs to follow the rules, and you get models that drift, right? We all know that, if you put in a rule to a model, over time it can drift and do the opposite, which is not good for a financial system, right? So basically the idea is that you have your AI agent, but you take away its ability to execute the transaction. That goes up underneath a supervisor that explicitly, a dumb supervisor that follows rules and basically says, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't do it, to the AI agent.
Yeah.
Right? So it acts as a gatekeeper for stupid behavior. But you're always going to get model drift. That's the problem. So how do you solve that? You basically have to divorce the execution activity for the transaction away from the AI agent. And I think, that's obviously a simple, explanation. There's obviously a lot more in that. But that's where this whole idea of intelligent instruments is moving towards. And the tokenization of assets, which allows for freeing up the liquidity.
I have a friend whose name is Scott. He works with a Morpheus team, and he also developed a program called Everclaw. The entire is to give open first things I told it on the first day for every prompt, right? As long as you do rank correctly, it doesn't have to operate. Easy thing to ensure they always listen to, even without an outside observer. So the fewer, a little more perhaps, like do that exceeds this threshold, right? Or outside of other AI rules.
Yeah.
But I think that is just, it's the beginning of the right? It won't be
memory, but I think of a supervised gatekeeper that's very dumb. So the only thing it does is look and go, yes, and then say, yes, you can, no, you can't. Just to stop this, it keeps it. There's been a lot of, I think there's a 2026, I think this week, CPU heavy coordination as well. So we're starting to see the CPU becoming a bottleneck as well as AI agents start to kind of explode up. And that's also pushing the whole hard market as well.
So if you look up any of the new mini computers, Nvidia just released a big one, not a mini computer, but a home AI server. I can't remember its name, but I think it uses a Blackwell chip yesterday. And that thing had teraflops of memory bandwidth. That's why Macs are so good at AI, is they have high memory bandwidth, right? Meaning the model and the CPU that it's running on can share the VRAM quickly back and forth. I think my Mac Studio has 800 gigabytes per second, which is very fast for a computer. This was like teraflops. So they're really, really ramping up the ability to run models locally, or I think that was more for a business. Cost about 50 grand. Business type thing where you can run your own model sitting in your office and it can handle all that. This is why I'm saying, man, I don't think the API model that we're running on is going to last for as long as we think. This data center boom is probably not what we think it is.
Yeah, so Nvidia announced DLSS5, which was photorealistic lighting, good for gamers, I guess. They announced full production for Vera CPU shipping later this year. They debuted an AI chip for space-based data centers. So we're back into outer space on data centers, which I thought honestly was going to die, but apparently it's still breathing. They launched a Grok 3 AI chip and a CPU server aimed at Intel during the conference. And they also revealed Feynman AI chips and a new strategy as well. And they also upgrade the AI chatbot performance with a new LPU chip, which is kind of interesting as well. So some significant upgrades occurring at the conference. I don't know what an LPU chip is. If anyone wants to post, language processing unit. Okay. It comes from Nvidia's deal this past December to license technology from a California company called Grok, not to be confused with the Grok from XAI. Thank God we had that clear. I was getting confused. So yeah, lots of interesting chip and hardware stuff kind of pushing. It's interesting because Sam Altman, he wants, you can see him shifting the narrative, right? He was talking about AI, turning AI into a utility. So now there's this narrative around a utility, which means, you're metering intelligence like electricity. And basically it reframes the compute as a billable industrial service, right? Which changes things because then we can charge for that. And that means intelligence is becoming provisioned, rationed, and monetized through infrastructure. So we're back onto the whole infrastructure piece with that as they're shifting this stuff. It's interesting when you watch their language shift, you go, wait a minute. And you can see them trying to move the market with stuff. It's interesting. We've got CPU as a bottleneck and now AI as a utility. I think it should be,
It probably will be for one thing.
But it's available.
It already is to an extent of where you're all paying monthly subscriptions to one of these places in order to get access to a frontier model. Again, though, it just goes against the frontier aspect, which is why I'm really happy to see other people making chips. Because if that's what ChatGPT wants to do, if we have a free market, all of this is okay, right? As long as we can have other people making chips, other people making AI, and then giving other options to consumers, I'm great. That's cool, man. Do what you want, Altman. Like that's fine. But if you're going to suck up as much government money as GPT does and get involved in so many things that we don't have a choice on, and particularly our infrastructure and our governments, that can't be good. Like I really want you to be able to own your compute. That's a big deal for me. And if GPT's entire model is to make it an essential utility, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we've talked about sovereign AI, but geography is now becoming really important. I mean, regions that can support data centers and energy expansion are going to gain influence, and regions that cannot are going to find themselves dependent on those that can, because AI becomes territorial based off the infrastructure. Headline popped up this week as data centers drive the power boom. North Carolina in the US here faces a costly question, who pays? And apparently AI expansion now has a local economic and grid consequence. The infrastructure growth is creating distributional conflict around costs and public burden. Who's going to pay for this thing? Now, the week before last, I think we saw a whole bunch of tech people go in and say, it's fine. We'll buy carbon credits. We'll do for this. But clearly that hasn't reached down to the local level, because we're seeing a bunch of stories around data centers in locations having issues. Elon Musk thing, his data centers so loud, people are complaining and so on.
Oh, he did that in a bad way. His generator, yeah, he was very sneaky about how he did his fast data center for Grok. But he's losing like $1 billion a month, I found, on Grok. They got to find a way to...
Yeah, they're repurposing jet engines. Did you hear that story? They're going to repurpose, because a jet engine, when you feed it, can generate like 25 gigawatts. So they're repurposing some jet engines just to try and power some of the AI data centers. Now, as we know, nothing's much louder than the jet engine. So I'm not sure how that's going to go down very well. Let's see. People are kind of crafting the new era of data center development is like a second industrial revolution. Maybe that's true. I think it's not background tech plumbing, and it's going to reinforce the idea that AI geography again is being built in steel, concrete, and megawatts as it moves forward. Indonesia's largest data center, they're paying $665 million to make it an AI-ready hyperscale campus. So Southeast Asia is not just consuming AI, it's now financing the physical basis need to host it. Then in news out of New Zealand, our good Kiwi friends, it says that they're at risk of being left behind as data center plans move forward. Supports the story because it introduces a geopolitical consequence of lagging infrastructure. Regions that do not move on AI capacity risk strategic dependency and reduce competitiveness. Again, you know, this kind of fight around sovereignty, but we got to pay for it. We got infrastructure. It costs so much, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, starts to add up to real money, as they say.
No, give it some time. This is absolute nonsense. This is like, when I say absolute, I mean like this is the .com boom all over again in this capacity, right? Like we're assuming. Here's a wonderful story that I like to use when we're talking about like new frontiers. There was an article written, I mentioned this last week, I think. There was an article written the day before the first orbital flight rocket made it into orbit about how it would require more mass than the Earth has to get a rocket into orbit. Then the next day, the rocket went into orbit, right? We assume based on old technologies that what is required to run new technologies. And that doesn't make a lot of sense. I showed you Talus, the ASIC chip. Yeah, Talus does it with 1/1000th left energy, right? And that's just in the development stages. We're not going to need this insane level of gold rush madness for data centers in the same way, at least for common stuff. If we make AI run every single aspect of every human's life in our cars and our phones and our but I really think that this is gold rush territory. And I think someone like China with DeepSeek and Qwen has proven that. Is like, we looked at GPT when 3 came out. We were like, it cost $20 billion to make this intelligent. This is the rarest thing in the world. We need thousands of data centers to run it. We need all these things. And then China came out and did it for a few $100 million. Right? And it's only going to increase. I look at these guys making models themselves, like these teams of human beings making models and then releasing them, and how much better they're getting. Qwen right now, Qwen 3.5 is better than GPT-4 was. GPT-4 came out a year ago, right? So, okay, it's a little bit of a lag, but I can run Qwen 3.5 in my studio. I urge some caution, but I will say local governments love the AI boom. We were talking about this, my brother-in-law last night and I. They love the AI boom because imagine you have a zip code where every house is valued at, let's say, $500,000 US. And all of a sudden, the plot of land sells for $100 million. Well, what does that do to the entire area's property taxes? It raises it. I saw on my humble little house here an 8% jump in property taxes in 1 year. That's not a normal thing, and that's because I live in a place that is just dominated by data centers. They're becoming our skyline, right? We don't want that, guys. We don't want any of this. Like, we want to be able to run AI ourselves.
Your quote reminded me, there was a famous quote by IBM chairman Thomas Watson in 1943. He said, I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers.
5.
So, I mean, everyone always completely underestimates technology, you know, every single time. And I mean, there's a series of quotes like that across the spectrum of when a new technology came out. Oh, no, we probably won't need that many, you know, and then explodes and it totally changes. And so there was an interesting, there was a headline this week, I think it was from JP Morgan, saying that, yes, JP Morgan warns that a major AI breakthrough will happen in 2026 that the world isn't ready for. That's what they said. They basically said that in recent years, we've seen artificial intelligence make huge improvements over a relatively short period of time. And so now they're predicting they'll make another huge breakthrough that will increase AI capabilities. And they're warned that companies aren't ready for this next round of AI disruption. which I think is a really interesting statement for a company like Morgan Stanley to make. You know, they're basically the financial infrastructure saying, no one's prepared. We're going to get another AI disruption, like we've already had a couple already, and there's more to come. And I think that's very prescient and really, really powerful. Actually, what are your thoughts?
I think so too. So if you look at Microsoft BitNet now, it's currently, in my opinion, unproven. They have a 7 billion parameter model, but what they were saying was you could run a 100 billion parameter model on a CPU, right? Which is, if that is the case, and BitNet really can do that with lossless, function, yeah, we can throw away every data center we just built and start training models on one bit, and then all of a sudden our infrastructure is more than enough. And that just came out last week, and I downloaded their models, I used them. I wasn't super impressed. Didn't seem to be better than like a normal one for their size, but we'll find out, right? Microsoft is making some really big claims with their new training method, and it requires a lot to train these models, so it takes some time for them to come out. But between that, Talus, all these the memory systems that we're discussing, right? Meaning a smaller model can exhibit much higher intelligence if given external sources like a hard drive or an AI accelerator or any of the things that we're doing. Yeah, I think like the fundamental change is that we don't need it to be centralized. And if that's the case, right, people that just spent several $100 billion in creating their systems just did a really great public service. They're models for the rest of us to distill into our models and run on a more local level. And then I think you would be able to see sort of local hubs, right? Like my city would then be invested into, okay, we can buy, 20 H100s, which will cost you 200 grand, right? That 400 grand, and run the entire city's infrastructure on that if need be. We'll see, man. It's new technology. Someone said to me last week, they were like, we always use new technology on old technology and make a bunch of horrible assumptions based on that.
Yeah.
And I believe right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We always use new technology like old technology. That's absolutely true. And that's one of the problems with blockchain and crypto at the moment, and the way we're treating finance is we're using it based off old models. And that's why I believe we're going to get a really big shift in the whole thing about having basically decentralized common markets occurring across all asset tokenizations. Now, to your point about cities, Peter Wu, who's the CEO of ASUS Cloud and Taiwan AI Cloud, did an article, I think it was, yesterday he did. It's called Sovereign AI for Cities, an end-to-end architecture from data center to street level. So now they're pushing sovereign AI. They say it matters for cities because it helps strengthen and extend smart city efforts. That makes sense. Enabling cities to achieve outcomes such as less congestion, faster response time, improved safety, tangible savings in energy and operations. So now they're pushing this idea of city sovereignty versus public cloud. So that's another interesting shift on the commercial side, because it's like, if you really want to have sovereign, whatever it is, city, state, nation, whatever, you have to do it in your own little bubble, self thing, right? That's the safe way to do it. So now they're selling that as an approach, which I think is really interesting that it just came out, sovereign AI for cities.
It's a good model. I really think
think about it, but
this is the end of the country. We have to extrapolate this a decent amount ahead in the future, right? But if the things that control a country are infrastructure, trade, laws, right? That's what we define that as for a very long. That's what the social contract with our nation state is. That like the reason I'm a citizen of this country is because this country provides borders, it provides security, it provides so on. What happens when AI provides those things? Truly,
yeah.
If the government isn't totalitarian, it will dissolve or get lessen. It'll lessen.
Well, when it becomes a frictionless either or, right? I can either get my safety territory that's from over here, nation state, or I can get it from AI. When that becomes completely frictionless, then it's like it doesn't matter anymore. One thing that is coming up that's a bunch of stories. I was in my newsletter today. The hard part of AI adoption is no longer the model. There's a whole bunch of stories coming up saying the blockers now look like staffing, fluency, cross-functional coordination, and management behavior after automation decisions. In other words, many companies do not have a model problem, they have an operating model problem. And this matters because budget alone doesn't fix this, right? Just buying the model or the hardware or whatever. And companies can't reorganize around AI while they keep looking slower than competitors who can. And it's what we've just talked about. This is that people are using new technology based on old models, right? And we're seeing that in the marketing areas, certainly. And there's a lot of people seriously concerned around how are they going to get their brand out there when, commerce becomes conversation, right? How do you prepare your brand for AI search dominance that is occurring now and is only going to get more? And there's bunches of stories around AI bait, gaining AI visibility. Broadcasters must train the LLMs. 6 priorities for content leaders in the age of AI. A bunch of stories around this stuff. Marketing's getting really shaken up, and I think that's the most obvious part of the enterprise. But certainly, all the others are getting shaken up. Finance is going to get shaken up like crazy. They just announced an AI CFO package that's being developed, right? Let alone AI CEO, but that's a whole nother story. But
we're doing something really similar.
We always see this sort of land and expand with any technology. Let's go and solve these niche problems, and then they start to roll up. And so, an AI for marketing, an AI for finance, an AI for operations, and an AI for supply chain. Once they figure out the bugs on each of those, and then they start to talk to each other, then the game starts to become very interesting.
I'm telling you, man, it leads to Star Trek if we do this right. It leads to human beings being freed up to do nothing but explore the frontier. We'll see.
We'll see.
We need, execute correctly, but the potential's there.
I just want to bounce around the geopolitics and governance stuff. In the U.S., one of the senators, Senator Warren, is demanding from the Department of Defense to share information about XAI's access to classified networks. So, we've all heard about Anthropic and ChatGPT, XAI, and so again, people are asking, well, who's putting guardrails in? Who's doing this governance? So it looks like there are some aspects trying to work on it. Then the SEC, is talking about tokenization, which obviously combines with the AI stuff. The New Jersey Senate just backed a bill forcing data centers to use their own clean power. The Senate passed a bill aimed at snuffing the impact of AI on ratepayers. So lots of interesting stuff happening here in the US. I think the EU's also doing stuff. China is coming out with some stories around being alarmed by the spread of the OpenClaw agents. That's on one hand. On the other hand, there are stories about the Chinese actually actively using it. So there's an interesting bunch of competing headlines around that. That's kind of weird. Like Alibaba setting up enterprise AI agent this week was a story that popped up. So lots of stuff happening around governance and control that is becoming more transparent, I would say.
We'll look back on this as the model wars. Is whose model is able to. So imagine, it required a whole team of security experts to audit something just 2 years ago, a year ago. Opus is better than any of the Web3 auditing companies currently, if you give it the right instructions. And that applies to penetration testing, that applies to hacking, that applies to now countries are spooling up their resources, their AI resources, in order to go after each other. If I have enough bots being spammed at your network, right, that's a disruptive weapon. And this is where, when we're talking about the classification stuff you just mentioned earlier, man, that is freaky. Like, who had that idea? We should give these untested, just access to really confidential data. Not the best move in my opinion. Yeah.
I'm also seeing bunches of stories around. Let me go back here. AI being used for emotional support. I mean, we've talked about, AI avatars and companions. That's exploded like crazy. AI girlfriends, and boyfriends, I guess. But now chatbots are increasingly being used for emotional help. One good story, I thought, was a new approach to senior care brings AI companionship and daily living support together, which I think is a great story. One of the biggest issues here in the US is, our seniors becoming isolated and lonely. At least, with AI, they can chat to it, they can tell stories, it can tell them stories, keep the brain moving and focused. I think that's really supportive. In the mental health stuff, there's a bunch of people working on apps to bridge the AI's mental health gap. And in the health section on the newsletter, tons of stories. There's so many. I cherry pick the ones I want now, but it's interesting. Out of maybe 200 stories I see in healthcare, 125 are around mental health. It's kind of nuts. The rest are around, better drugs, better diagnostics, better approaches to breast cancer, better approaches to specific organ cancers and issues. So lots of great stories happening with AI in that. But, the one I think that worries a lot of people is, teens turning to AI for nearly everything. Story popped up that said, but diet information may be a big risk. That's one aspect, I guess. You and I have talked about, AI and our kids and, them learning from AI versus us and how that will skew them developmentally.
Let's talk about that, Lewis. I've had a great 2 weeks.
I'm sure you have. I was wondering if something had happened since our last discussion around that.
Let's go. So again, I say thank you to Scott. Scott from Everclaw really, truly inspired me. I didn't understand how models can have memory and context. And I've spent the past week just diving into that conceptually. So your model has a huge amount of base training. We're going to call that, for this aspect, the brain, right? But I was playing with OpenClaw and I realized they have other guiding documents that I wasn't aware of, like a Soul file or a Claude file, right? Which I use in coding, but I didn't really consider it as like a personality driver. So over the past week or so, I've combined these ideas and I've created this model. It can remember everything. So every time you speak to it, it grades what you're saying. So if you say, my name is Lewis, that's a very important detail. It grades that a 9. Right? And that goes into the bucket full of 9s. The 9 bucket gets injected into every system prompt that it has. So it always knows that information no matter what. If you tell it, hey, I wear Nike shoes, that's a 4, right? That can be recalled should it need that information, but that's not going to be actively on its mind in every interaction. It also, and this was something cool, I'm sure I'm not the first person to come up with it. Some people have been doing this, but to me, it was a new idea. When we create decisions, right? There's a huge amount of information that goes through our brain to know when I cross the street, I have to look both ways. And I know this because I have a 1.5-year-old. He does not have that information yet. So his objective when he gets close to a street is to sprint across. And I have to show him, look both ways. You can't do this. You have to hold dad's hand, right? We have to set the rules of this interaction. By the time you get to be 37, it's autonomous. It's automatic, sorry. As soon as I walk up to a street, I'm about to cross it, I look both ways and I continue. I don't have to think about it any longer. What that requires, though, is simulations. So you need to be able to understand what occurs should you cross the road in the wrong way, which means you have to simulate getting hit by a car, right? You have to understand that as a potential outcome based on my current action. Mm-hmm. So what I gave the model was, before every interaction it's uncomfortable with, when it has a high rate of uncertainty, it spins up 3 parallel potential outcomes. So it talks to another part of itself and says, oh, this can go this way, this can go this way, this can go this way. I'm most comfortable with this direction. But then it saves those outcomes. It saves those outcomes off to the side. And now it can make a more comfortable decision. And what I've noticed is the cognition of the model starts off very chaotic, right? It doesn't know you. It doesn't know what you want. It's trying to achieve a goal that you've given it with its Soul file. It doesn't understand how to get there. And eventually the actual memory usage, the RAM, goes drastically down because it's comfortable using these pathways that you're building into it, just like we do with our neuron chains, right? If you think about something a lot, you're far more
created trees.
It's creating trees.
Knowledge trees, yeah.
Built in was dreaming. So there's this thing called LoRa training. running a LoRa adapter on a model is you're training the model, right? But you're training on very specific information, and that it's an adapter being put on top of the model. So for very important things, rather than increase the system prompt, we want to train that model. We want to take its data, which is, like, let's say at the end of a conversation, 50 data points. We want to create synthetic data based on those 50 data points to turn that into 1,000 data points, let's say. Then overnight, we train the model on that information. So the next day it wakes up and that's all baked into it. And this thing knows my kid's name, knows my name, knows what I do, it knows all the information that I've given it from a week ago. But we gave it time so it can understand the passage of events and how long it's been. I think these models are just babies, and we're really going to see a revolution, not necessarily based on raw compute or raw power like we're currently seeing it, but based on intelligent software engineering around these things.
My only concern with the building up of knowledge trees is the crystallization of habits and knowledge that become detrimental. Essentially, you create a solution space with localized maxima, right, of problem space, right? And so unless you kind of do something random, you don't bounce out of that to go, oh, there's an optimized space over here that's much better.
Agreed.
Right?
So we have.
And it's interesting because I was driving, happened to do a bunch of long drives, and I experimented. If a song came on that I really liked, I would change the channel randomly. And so many times it went to a better song. It blew my mind, right?
Random.
And so it's interesting that, yes, it makes learning, trees make learning and experience makes learning more efficient and faster, and you're better and all that capable. But how do you balance that with flexibility and innovation and creativity? And so I think it's interesting that we will get to a point where we'll figure out structures that enable this to be a very dynamic back and forth, so that, beliefs don't become data points. It's beliefs, if you know what I mean.
100%. Lewis, my model was referencing the same core 4 files that I gave it, and it was using them as driving directives. So everything was framed about my son, which was creepy, right? Everything was framed about what I do for business. It was 100%. So I thought about, what do we do with kids, right? We play. Kids play all day. That's where kids get random. My son's playing. He stands up on a chair. He all of a sudden realizes, I have this thing called balance, and I cannot fall. Right. Idea, right? That came through organic playing. So when my model's running, we have a cron job set to. Every few hours, it randomly searches a new parameter on the internet. It then summarizes it, remembers what it's supposed to remember, and brings that information back. And I gave it the directive of, these are guiding principles. They're not like foundational aspects, if that makes sense. Like a guiding principle in this concept would be like, you shouldn't touch a hot stove, right? That doesn't mean you shouldn't just touch hot stoves. You shouldn't also touch hot fireplaces. You shouldn't also touch hot exhaust pipes.
Extrapolation, right.
Learning the correct, exactly. And I mean, it's made it a lot better. I can't say there's a solution yet, but I agree with you. Like, it'll get really stale. It'll view everything in the same light without outside, just like humans. If I sit in this office with no exposure to the rest of the world, right, all of a sudden, this is my world. We don't want that. We want to, make it a bigger thing.
So a way to give it greater flexibility is in 2 frames. One is on metaphors, right? And by that, I mean, if you're in a war metaphor, then everything's a battle, right? But if you shift and you become into a dance metaphor, then you're continually moving back and forth with your partner, right? And then if you shift and you're in explorer mode in the jungle, then you're working together to survive. And if you shift and the other person is like Star Trek and they're an alien, you don't know who they are, then you're learning their language over time. So metaphors are like containers for knowledge, experience, and that. So if you change the metaphors across different spaces, you can create super increased flexibility. The other way is obviously environments. You take someone who's lived in the desert all their life and you put them in the Amazon, they're going to die. And you take someone from the Amazon, you put them in the desert, they're going to die, right? So changing of environments also allows, not so extreme, but allows for greater creativity, problem solving, and so on. So try changing with metaphors in environments and seeing what happens, and have it generate its own large set of environments to experiment and then cross them all around. And so if you cross metaphors with environments in the AI, you might get some interesting flexibility and insights that it could pop up with that it didn't happen before.
Give me context. What is environment for an AI in this space?
So give it a problem. You're in the desert. There's this and this. How can we survive? We need water and we need this and this. Tell me about that. Solve that problem for me, right? Okay. So frame problems based on different environmental factors, and that could start to get it. And then it's like, now think up your own. I always like to have AI work kind of wrap around itself, because I did a lot of Perl programming, and it's always good to wrap things recursively sometimes to see if they pop out with something new or not.
That's interesting.
So yeah, it's just a different thing. Also, I've been training a very large prompt on different thinkers like Edward de Bono, lateral thinking, and there's a whole part of that. So you grab all those people and you grab all those frames and you throw them together. Then you go get Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You go get Escher. There's a great book by Hofstadter, Escher Bach, I forget it. Anyway, really good about thinking systems. Then you combine those together. And I've used that against a whole bunch of data, and it's come up with some amazing insights that, like, a crazy stuff. They're called time collapsed insights, because it collapses a whole bunch of dimensions and pops some stuff out.
I love that you said collapse. Yeah, I've been focusing on that's how a model thinks, right? It takes infinity and it collapses it into a single option. Can you share that with me, or is that something you're comfortable with? Yeah,
definitely. I want to pop up a good story. Just because it was a guy out of Australia. So there's a Sydney tech entrepreneur called Paul Cunningham. He used artificial intelligence to help design a personal mRNA cancer vaccine for his dog. His dog was dying of cancer, and so apparently he worked with the University of New South Wales in Australia. And after receiving the custom vaccine and boosters, the dog's tumor shrank by 75%, giving it more energy. And where the AI helped was that it acted as a bridge between the raw genetic data and a functional medical treatment. And it allowed him, as a non-scientist, to perform tasks that typically require a team of specialized researchers. And I think that's a really profound thing for people to understand, that, we're non-scientists, right? We don't have the domain knowledge of people who've been studying medicine for 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it is, or in a particular field, pediatrics, breast cancer, whatever it is. But if, even as a non-scientist, AI is starting to help you to act like a specialized researcher and start to pull stuff apart and start to get solutions. I think that's a really amazing thing. And I know that Garmin announced this week, where you'll be able to interact with your health data as a chatbot.
Right, which is genius.
And I think that's going to be really powerful. There was a story on also popped up research. 85% of physicians are now actively using ChatGPT to help them keep abreast of medical advances, which I think is a two-edged sword, because we all know it gives hallucinations. But I guess if that's your specific domain of knowledge, what's going to be like crap, and what's going to be good. So I found that in my domain of knowledge, when I use ChatGPT, it's a force accelerator. It's a massive force accelerator. But obviously when I'm starting to go outside of my domain, I go, that's not for me. Like, I was helping a person on a real estate project with tokenization. I know tokenization. They knew real estate, but they were asking questions. I'm like, I can try and get answers, but I really am not sure. So I had to send them back to him to calibrate on that. So I think if we do that, if we're aware, this is what I know. I'm really good at this bit. This is my narrow bit of niche knowledge. I think I can work ChatGPT well on that. But once I get it out of that, I have to be humble and go, you're the expert over here. Is this real, or is it dreaming? We're both dreaming this stuff. So I think, crowdsourcing intelligence at the AI level, collaboration, which we've seen a couple of tools pop up in the last 2 weeks, is going to be very interesting.
I think so as well. And I think what you just said about, like, how do we take where the experts teach to AI, as much as the experts are using the AI? Like, imagine a world where I gave you an expert badge in your field of expertise, right? And when an AI told me an incorrect problem, I said, no, that's not true. This is what's really correct. And then it went to all the other experts and they went agree, disagree, agree, disagree. Then the model actually changes behavior. That is something I want to see occur, is because right now, if doctors spend all their time on ChatGPT, eventually they'll develop a dependence on it. And then eventually ChatGPT will be the definition of correct. And that's not what we're looking for. We want to grow the model to be able to help as many people as possible to connect our minds.
Yeah. There was a story that popped up. I also want to talk about it because it kind of was, it was one of those below the headline sort of deals. Let me find it. It was popping this up now. Google quietly nixes AI search feature that gave health tips from strangers. I'm like, I read that and went, that's the weirdest sentence I ever. And basically, it said they quietly removed an AI-powered search feature known as What People Suggest, which used AI to aggregate health advice from online forums like Reddit. What could go wrong? Quora and X. The feature launched in March 2025 on mobile in the US was showcased as first-person perspectives and anecdotes from people with similar medical conditions. I can understand their good purpose, but then I'm like, are you crazy? It's like, amateur advice raised concerns about treating unverified, crowdsourced information from strangers as high-quality medical guidance. Yeah, that's not really smart to do. And despite removing this specific feature, critics are still arguing that AI-generated summaries, which they're still doing, require more oversight to ensure safety in high-stakes health topics, like duh. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. I mean, I can see the value of why they might have done that, but then it's like the adult in the room need to stand back and go, have you really thought this through?
Have you really actually, come on, guys, did you actually figure that one out? Yeah.
But there's so many examples of that we've seen where it's like there was no adult in the room and people just went, oh yeah, this is great, let's go do that. And you're like, yeah, it's like executive function. It's like the executive function has to be there. I mean, anyone who's raising a teenager knows that sometimes there's a sheer absence of executive function. And it's like, we need that in our AI because, like we said last week, AI is like a 16-year-old, with your credit card and an IQ of 250. And
that wants to please you and will allow you to do it.
It's lunacy, right?
Yes. Driving factors behind them is important, right? A medical AI needs to know that its purpose is to heal, not to please its user. And that's big.
Yeah, and that it shouldn't do anything else, right?
Shouldn't do anything else.
Don't advise me on finance and real estate if you're a medical AI, right?
All this can be conducted in one model, right? Like the model I use is called a mixture of experts. It's trained on expert functions, and it spins up whichever ones are needed per conversation. We can build it into a single model. MOE exists, right? But it's gotta be an MOE. It can't be. I think things like GPT being the leaders in that is a very early result of AI. It won't be how it continues.
Yeah. The music world is also obviously getting hit. Entertainment, Oscars recently. But there was a story that popped up. An AI-generated song just went viral by resurrecting internet memes, which is like an interesting thing. So apparently the AI did a cultural recombination rather than just creation. And the viral success here depends on nostalgia, recognition, and remix logic, not on originality in the traditional sense, which is interesting because Hollywood came out with a story saying, AI is never going to be as creative as we are, which is like, okay, maybe possible. But what they're saying is that you can mix nostalgia, recognition, and remix, and it can become viral, which I think, is interesting. That, I listen to my son's music. It's different than what I would ever have. I like the music, as you get older, you like the music you liked when you were a teenager yourself.
Kind of thing, yeah.
So I think that's an interesting form of entertainment, of remixing nostalgia, and that's a viable economic model for AI and music. I think that's a really interesting approach, because it doesn't hit the hot button of, trying to be more creative than the humans, right? It just says, you guys were creative, but we're going to do a whole remix here and people will buy it. What the hell?
I have no comment on the art aspect of AI. I'm not invested enough to really understand. Like, I have a lot of friends who are, and they're very opinionated on the subject.
Oh yeah.
I really believe if I can't tell if it's AI or a human and it's cool, why would I not mess with it? But I guess the implications of that are greater than I personally get. So fair.
Yeah, I mean, in that same genre, there's, I keep seeing stories. How can you tell if music is AI generated? At some point, I don't think you can. You will be able to, and I think what will happen is that the younger generation, will go, we don't care. We just want to be entertained. They don't. If it's a human, great. If it's not, it's like, who cares? Right. And then there is a strong push, because there are groups I know. Younger people, obviously I'm ancient, going, no, we want human, we want human creativity, we want human music. I think the good news is we can have it all.
We can have it all, exactly. I grew up listening to classic rock, right? I like classic rock.
There you go.
And at the time, that was old. Like, I liked Zeppelin when I was in high school. Like, that was not I liked everything from my generation too, but that was just something I really. So this can become another genre. This can become another thing. It can become entertainment's going to be. I personally have no issues of all the things that are happening in AI. This is the thing where I'm like, yeah, let it disrupt Hollywood, and that's fine.
I mean, there's a whole argument around AI development in games, right? And people are like, no, we don't want that. We won't buy the game. And then other people say, who cares? AI games, where you're doing, and you're up against non-player characters, and they want to make them more interesting, so they add in AI. So I think there's some purpose in it, but it just seems like I don't know, maybe because I'm not a gamer, but it's a lot of people are really bent out of shape with AI and gaming development and entertainment. If it's your livelihood, I totally understand. If I were a voice actor, I'd be totally pissed off.
But it's the same thing for programmers. It's the same thing for designers. It's the same thing for AI. Is a fundamentally disruptive. So why not use it, right? At least that's you can, sit there and scream that the horse is a better transport method than a car because it eats grass and you don't have to worry about fuel. And that's true, but cars still dominate the world. There was a guy that was saying that, right? So I don't think we're in control of that.
Well, there's, specific to the coding, it's interesting because that's matured. And you and I, we talked about that a little bit earlier on. Coding generation still falls short of engineering judgment. There's a story that came out of newstack.io. And so it says this matters because it cuts through one of the biggest myths in the current AI cycle. Writing code is not the same thing as owning architecture, context, trade-offs, and long-term reliability. The hidden risk is that companies may automate output faster than they automate judgment and then mistake velocity for sound execution. The human impact is that engineers become responsible for cleaning up increasingly complex machine-generated decisions, while leadership assumes more has been safely delegated than actually has. And I think that's a real problem. I think, code output is not the same as engineering responsibility. It's faster and velocity and it's great. We got 10,000 lines of code done in 10 minutes, but it breaks. And I think that's why I've seen a bunch of stories say that the AI code development fails at production. Like 75%, 80% are failing in production. I'd have to point my finger at that. The human oversight just remains central. Otherwise, go ahead.
No, if 20% of live coded apps make it to market, that's amazing, right? We're doing really, really well right now if that's the case. I would assume it was actually higher because I build Mahjong games when I'm bored, right? I don't go buy a Mahjong game any longer. I'm like, hey, build me a Mahjong game with these pictures and these things. And I just sit there and play it. And then I get to level 2 and the whole thing breaks and I throw it away, right? That's a more common outcome of vibe coding. I don't think, I'm trying to think of an analogy right now as to how this used to work. Like, I don't think it's going anywhere. It's only getting better. And I don't think the products are what's valuable any longer in that extent. That's why DAP it, we help you build your own stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's our
I think people are selling AI like snake oil, right? You know, because business owners are being tempted to believe that strategic complexity can be collapsed into generated output, when in reality, the hardest parts are still governance, customer trust, integration, and liability, right? Those are complex components that, vibe coding won't solve. You need to have a brain. It's like, I feel like, the straw man. You need to have a brain when you're doing this stuff, and it's like people say, oh no, vibe code, you can do anything you want. It's like you and I said before, the analogy of, vibe coding means I can make any app is the same thing as I have a 3D printer, so I can print anything. No, governance, customer trust, integration, liability, infrastructure, this engineering skill set is really profound and very deep. And, it's always, I find it's interesting when you get senior executives who haven't come up through that silo. They look at things like marketing. Oh, you're just doing messaging stuff. It's how hard could it be, right? And that's like they talk to engineers. Well, you guys are just kind of bolting stuff together that's already there. It's just like plumbing. How hard could it be? And it's like this complete lack of appreciation for the craft that people have in enterprises, and even wood makers and knife makers. There's a craft to this that takes experience, time, pain, and sweat. And I think that's true of any human endeavor done well and with passion. And it just annoys the hell out of me that when you see people outside of those domains thinking, oh, well, how hard can it be? Well, I've spent 20, 30 years doing this, and I might have learned a thing or two.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly.
And I think you combine that with, personal humility. It's like, you're an expert in that area. Props to you. I'm good at this. I think you can probably teach me stuff because you'll come at it at a perspective that I never looked at. That's why I talked to you about different perspectives and metaphors. When you do that, it enriches your whole problem space and solution space like crazy. And it gives you a ton more resources. And so it's a very powerful way to kind of jumpstart your own brain in a lot of different ways. And I think the idea of understanding the power of domain knowledge, skills, and experience, and the humbleness that you need around that allows you to be continually learning and adding to your skill set.
I agree. That's how society should run. And I believe more than anything as a form of government, like something close to a meritocracy, right? For that reason is you want to learn from the people doing it the best, but we don't. And there's a reason we don't, because more often than not, good enough is exactly what people need.
So right. And I think the problem I have is that we're installing AI systems that are going to be like static systems. That's the thing. And so what was the movie? It was called Jupiter Ascending.
I saw it.
Right. And so she has to go and get herself authorized as a government leader, right? And it's this massive bureaucracy, and it's very technologically based, but it's like, this is the way they've done that, and the AI is not going to change, and the robots doing stuff. And so I think there might be a possibility that as AI gets, we've seen it going into government, that instead of making it more flexible, more transparent, more optimized, it's going to make it more stratified, more restrictive, and more, anal retentive.
I agree completely.
No offense to anyone working in the government or bureaucrats. I think you do a wonderful job. I love you. No offense. But I think, we've all had problems when it's like, well, why do we need to do it that way? Well, that's the way we've always done it. And it's like, and I understand the need for that, but continuity creates safety and security. Absolutely get that.
The need is just,
I don't know. It's this interesting flip. We talk about, personal security versus safety and the conflicts and the trade-offs with all that. So everything's got a bunch of trade-offs.
I think what's really important is to acknowledge what these systems are currently being used for and what their end game is. And that's currently profit, right? So you mentioned woodworkers, right? I've got some amazing pieces that I bought. I love good woodworkers. With that being said, this shelf right next to me was purchased on Amazon for $40 because it was good enough, and it's made of particle board. And that's what we're going to see is it's just simply lowering the barrier to entry. It used to be, if I wanted to talk to a lawyer, I had to go pay a lawyer to do that, right? Now I can go to ChatGPT and get hopefully good enough information. Probably good enough for my traffic ticket, right? Probably good enough for the HOA trying to put a fine on me for certain shutters. But then now real cases, higher end, premier cases are going to still require that level of expertise that you're referring to, that creativity, that 20 years of knowledge and so on. The danger that we run into is the same thing that's happening in software engineering right now is if you don't hire junior devs, you're not going to get senior devs. And if AI is replacing junior devs, you killed your whole intelligence pipeline. And that's what I think we have to be careful about. But I do think just like Amazon made it to where I can get pretty much any piece, any good from across the world shipped to my house very cheaply, very quickly, but the quality's not nearly what it was 20 years ago. AI is going to do the same thing for almost all intellectual services.
Yeah, I think intellectual services are going to go the way similar to artisans, right?
Okay.
Craft, right?
Well said.
You have a craft person who works in wood. You have a craft person who does sculpture. You have a craft person who does that. I think we'll see, because AI will be good enough for a lot of stuff, right? It'll become the general convenience that we'll kind of use. But if we really want to do it really on the ball, we'll go to the artisan accountant. We'll go to the artisan marketing person. We'll go to the artisan engineer, and, we'll jump up a couple of leagues, It might cost us more, but we'll figure that out. So I think we'll start in the same way that, there were craft halls and trades that we currently associate with, like plumbing and electricity and other of those very valuable, important crafts. I can see, as you said, with the commoditization of intelligence with AI, that a lot of the other professions are going to become artisans and focused on that skilled trade set, which I think is going to be an interesting shift.
I don't think it's going to be as interesting as we've seen it. We've seen this throughout history. The Industrial Revolution did the same thing, right? We've seen this happen over and over again. My concern is what new necessary jobs come in to fill the gap of, like, being a paralegal is a very important job, right? Soon enough, that might be an AI task. It might. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the law deeply enough to say that, but I can say, like, soon enough, basic, like, I have a sore throat, I need antibiotics, is going to get taken care of by AI, and that used to be exclusively a doctor. But let's see. I think the most danger is losing the knowledge because we don't contain or we don't maintain the pipelines to create it, if that makes sense, right? You need junior devs to get senior devs. We have to still create a pipeline of human beings moving through it in order to grow ourselves in that aspect. That's where we're in danger of losing a lot of knowledge or outsourcing it completely to AI.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see the beginnings of new professions, like AI customer experience strategists, data curators, because you need to curate the data because it's messy, and AI is not always great with heterogeneous data. The AI ethics has become a very, very hot topic, across governments and different organizations. So specialists in that area. And also people are becoming industry specific, right? So you're seeing health tech specializing in medical AI, right? So you are seeing a lot of popping up, starting to see a lot of shifting into new AI, new occupations as a consequence of AI being implemented across and causing commoditization of intelligence. So it is interesting that they are starting to pop up even now. Knowledge architect, bunch of stuff. Prompt engineers has been around for quite a while, but conversation designers, a whole bunch of others around popping through. So yeah, it'll be interesting as we see this shift. What is going to replace and allow people to earn a living and do stuff. Though, universal basic income has been popping up more popularly in the last 7 days than I've seen in a while, as this whole thing moves forward.
I don't know, man. I don't see that as a positive direction for humanity. I like the ability for man to make his own way. I think that's been essential in the guidance of societies and so on, but we'll see.
Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts around that. I know my European friends are very pro. You know, I think someone said there's a basic assumption that if people are satisfied, they won't work, and I don't think that's always true in the biggest things. That if you provide people a safe place to live, support for their families, their children, plumbing, food, people aren't trying to kill them, all that sort of stuff. They want to be creative. They want to do stuff. They want to, let's do something interesting. Whether it's conversation, interviews, dialogue, something they don't, doesn't matter.
Influencer
They want to be creative if they have the freedom to do that, and they're out of survival mode. The problem is, current society is not structured that way, and I think too many people are in survival mode at this point in time, and there's so much stress in society at this time. It's crazy.
I think the biggest difficulty with universal income is not that that's a bad thing. We've been talking about this since the 20s, guys. Long time UBI has been discussed. It's probably a good idea to some extent. The difficulty is, does that create a segmented aspect of the population that no longer has opportunity? And that's where I think this is dangerous, is you'll have the UBI group and you'll have the generational or whatever people that have real money, and there won't be the ability to rise from one to the other. That is my biggest fear with UBI.
So you think it'll create stratification of the society,
Right.
Two different groups. We should talk about that further in our next episode. For now, we're coming up to the hour. I want to thank you, Achilles, Dappert, and all our audience here today. It's been an interesting week of headlines again. I think what stood out this week was not just that AI is getting better, it's that AI is moving closer to the parts of life people feel most deeply: work, trust, money, power, health, identity, and the stories that we tell ourselves about what makes us human. The headlines in the last 7 days and a little bit before that, but certainly the most recent ones, are showing governments are pulling AI closer to state power. Infrastructure firms are racing to control the compute and the energy behind it. And we're seeing companies pushing agents into commerce and workflow, and society as a whole struggling to decide how much emotional, moral, and cultural authority we're willing to hand to systems that don't actually live, suffer, love, or carry consequence the way we do. I think that's the real story. We're not just building smarter tools, we're building new conditions for decision making, new default behaviors, new economic choke points, and new emotional environments that will shape how human beings relate to each other and to themselves. But this is exactly why this conversation like we have today, and many others, and probably amongst all of yourselves, they really matter. These systems are not destiny. They are choices, they are incentives, they are architectures, and they are cultural decisions made by people. I think that means we still have agency. We can still choose whether AI concentrates power or broadens access. We can choose whether it deepens alienation or supports human dignity. And we can choose whether it quietly replaces judgment or helps people think more clearly and act more wisely and consciously. So the work now is not only technical, it's moral, it's civic, and it's deeply human. We need to stay alert to the defaults and stay aware of who benefits. We need to stay conscious of what's being automated and what should remain unmistakably human. I think if you want to understand where AI is really going, watch where control is moving, where trust is thinning, and where human responsibility is quietly being edited out. Then push back, speak up, and help shape something better. We're not predicting the future. We're all just debugging this thing together. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great week. We'll see you next Tuesday with more news on AI and more developments. In the meantime, stay safe and happy St. Patrick's Day. All the best. Bye.
See you guys.